All right, boys and girls, this is Math Message 1-3. Now, if you were in class for this lesson, we did a lot of work looking at math tools, being able to find the math tools in our classroom, touch the math tools, learn how to use the math tools. If you are doing this lesson from home because you were absent, then you might have to improvise just a little bit if you don't have all of the tools that you need. But today what we really worked on is learning how to use math tools and use them appropriately so they actually work as a tool. So in class, we explored the tools in our toolkit, and we talked with our partners about how and when we would use those tools. Some of the tools we looked at are clocks. Okay, now you've been telling time since probably first grade. You started learning how to tell time, and in second grade you worked on telling time a lot. So now we have little clocks in our classroom that you're able to use when you need them, and you can touch them and you can move the hands on them. The one thing that you need to remember, just kind of as a little review, is just the difference between the long hand and the short hand. Remember, on a clock, there's a long hand and there is a short hand. Now, sometimes we forget which hand to read first, and which one is the hour hand and which one is the minute hand. So I always like to tell boys and girls, you are little before you are big, right? When you are a baby, you start out little and then you get big. So first, we're going to look at the little hand. So this little hand is pointing to the 2. And when we're little, we can only count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're just going to point, and whatever that little hand is pointing to, that's my number. It's 2. Okay? That gives me my hour. Now I'm big. I'm going to look at my big hand. And when I'm big, I can count by 5s, right? So as we're looking at the big hand, we are counting by 5s. If that big hand is pointing straight up to the 12, remember that is your o'clock time. Okay, so this clock says 2 o'clock. All right, so the main thing to remember as you're using a clock, just a little bit of a refresher, is that little hand is the hour hand. You're little before you're big, so read that one first. Your big hand is your minute hand, and for that one, you are counting by 5s. Okay, so 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and back to o'clock. All right, so we explored with our clocks a little bit in our toolkit. We also looked at our rulers, okay, and we noticed that the rulers that we have in class, one side measures in inches, and one side measures in centimeters. We looked at that and we noticed that inches are bigger, okay. If you're looking at your hand in between your knuckles, from big knuckle to big knuckle, that's about an inch. Centimeters are more like the width of your pinky fingernail. So inches are bigger than centimeters. So we explored that a little bit in class. We also looked to make sure some rulers, the 0 starts right at the edge of the ruler, and other rulers, the 0 might start a little bit in. So we learned that we have to make sure that when we're measuring something, we're starting on the 0. So if I were to try to drag this ruler right here up to one of my line segments, I'm going to need to make sure that that 0 is right at the edge of my line. So we kind of looked at our rulers a little bit, kind of reminded ourselves how to use a ruler. If you have a ruler at home, I encourage you to grab it and maybe try to measure a couple of things around the house. Look at that ruler, look at the inches, look at the centimeters, and explore it a little bit. All right, and then that brings me to page 5 in your workbook. So if you have your workbook at home, I want you to go ahead and try to do page 5 on your own. Pause the video, okay? Give yourself time to work through it, and then restart the video, and I'll go over it with you. All right, pause that video. All right, looking at problems 1, 2, and 3, we have our clock problems. Remember I said that you are little before you are big. So when you're looking at a clock, you're going to look at the little hand first. And when you're little, you can only count by one. So that little hand, it's in between the 8 and the 9. I'm just going to worry about the littler number, 8. So that little hand is on the 8. If it's in between two numbers, just go with the littler number. And then big hand, now that I'm big, I can count by 5s. I always start up here, that's my 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. So you should have had 830. Clock number 2, I'm little before I'm big. I look at the little hand. The little hand is between the 2 and the 3. It's not all the way on the 3 yet. So if it's not all the way on the 3 yet, I'm still going to call that 2. All right, now I'm going to look at my big hand or my minute hand. Now that I'm big, I count by 5. Start here at 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. Now, if I already know that this is 30, I could start there. 30, 35, 40, 45. Or maybe you just remember that that's 45 from last year. And in problem number 3, I'm going to create the time 6:10. Now remember, that first number, that's my hour. That's my little hand. So I'm going to put my little hand pointing toward the 6. And then 10 minutes. I'm going to start here. That's 0, 5, 10. My big hand needs to be pointing at the 2 for the 10 minutes. All right, now if you made any mistakes on there, pause the video and fix your mistakes. All right, so now boys and girls, you needed to use your ruler to measure the line segment. So give me a second here. All right, I had to pause my video for a second because I forgot to measure that line in my workbook. So you were to use your ruler to measure the line segment. If you were able to get a ruler at home and you measured that line segment, it should be about 3 inches long. It was actually a little bit more than 3 inches, but it was really close. And we just said it's about 3 inches long. And then you were to draw a line segment that is 10 centimeters long. So that's kind of hard for me to do that here on my smartboard screen, but you were to draw a line that's 10 centimeters long. All right, the next thing that you needed to do was use your calculator. What keys did you press to make each change? So boys and girls, I don't know if a calculator, I can pull up a calculator on my screen, but I honestly don't know if it shows up on your screen. But if I entered 50 on my calculator, I'm going to try it and I'll see when I watch the video. If I enter 50 on my calculator, I need to know what do I need to enter to change that to 107. Now, 107 is bigger, right? So I'm going to have to hit the plus sign on my calculator to make that happen. Now, I have to figure out what would I have to add to get to 107. You can actually use your number grid that we've been using for the last couple of weeks. We're trying to get from 50 to 107. So 50, think about that. And then I jump down. I'm going to kind of draw it. So I'm at 50. And then I'm going to go to 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So I went 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And now I need to move over to 107. So 7 more spaces this way. So if I add 57 to my calculator, that will give me 107. So you could just use your number grid to help you with this. And then enter 94 and change it to 30. So guys, if I entered 94 on my calculator and I wanted to change it to 30, that's smaller, isn't it? So I know I'm going to need to subtract. How much will I need to subtract? Well, let's see here. If I went up to 84, and then 74, and then 64, and 54, and 44, and 34. Well, that got me to 34, so that was 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. If I subtract 60, that's going to get me to 34. And then I need to subtract 4 more to get to 30. So if I subtract 64, that's going to get me to 30. Now, I'm not going to lie. This problem, these problems here, these trick boys and girls quite a bit at the beginning of 3rd grade. We'll work on these problems a little bit more as we go along. And then you were to use your pattern block template to trace 2 polygons that have exactly 4 sides. You don't have probably a pattern block template at home, but at school you could have traced something that looks like a square, a rectangle, you could have made a trapezoid, you could have made a kite. Whoops, that's a terrible kite. So you just needed to trace 2 shapes with 4 sides. And then what are polygons that have 4 sides called? Now, if you were at school, you could have used your student reference book, but does anybody know what a polygon with 4 sides is called? I'll bet you learned it last year. It's called a quadrilateral. All right, that is it, ladies and gentlemen, for lesson 1-3. You could play the number grid difference game. Remember the game that we played yesterday where you have your number and you have your partner's number, and then you are finding the difference using your number grid or your hundreds chart. So if you have a little bit of extra time, play the game number grid difference. And that is it for this lesson.